All right, g'day, hi, and welcome. Okay, we're going to have an interesting discussion today. No, the title is not going to be clickbait. It is going to be a thing. So, Les Paul Classic for $170. Does this, and a Gibson on top of that, does it exist? Well, not to buy, but to rent. I was looking at something, and something that I thought would make an interesting video is, you know, when you see like musicians on tour of not huge bands, but it's like you look, the drummer's got a DW kit, the guy is playing a cool SG3 or a cool 8-string LTD or something like that. And like, wow, they must be doing well. They must be making a lot of money. But a lot of bands, when they go on tour, especially if they're like from North America, like here in Canada or the United States, and they've got to go to Europe. You take somebody like Paul Gilbert, for example. Paul Gilbert goes to Japan with Mr. Big, right? So that's Billy Sheehan and Paul Gilbert, Eric, I can't remember the singer's name, and the new drummer. The old drummer had passed away, unfortunately. But Paul Gilbert rents he rents his amps. He brings his pedals overseas and maybe 2 or 3 guitars. But like he was saying, like the cost of air freight and stuff like that, like you can't fly equipment around the world, you know, economically, right? So a lot of these guys, they just literally rent the amps, whatever it is, the drum kits. You watch, like for example, I was listening to an interview with the lady from the band called Alterium. They're putting out some pretty cool stuff. And they were talking about like when they were making a video called Of War and Flames, and that because it was raining out, they didn't bring out the drum kit because it was a rental and stuff like that. And it got me thinking. So I looked at just like kind of like if you were, let's say you had like an Epiphone Les Paul or something, nothing wrong with that, and you were going to go play like a massive gig somewhere, like where you're going to get paid really well. And you wanted to kind of really just kind of, you know, put the icing on the cake, so to speak. Well, you could rent, like, for example, at a local Long and McQuaid, well, not that local for me, it's about an hour away, but I could go to Long and McQuaid and literally rent a Les Paul Classic for $170 a month. I could rent a Les Paul Supreme for something like $300 for the month. So let's say you were going to a recording studio, or like I say, you were going to play a couple of really good paying gigs. It might be worth it for you to rent better equipment. And you kind of get 2 wins here. One win is you get to play the Cadillacs on stage. And the second is you beat up their equipment, not yours. Now, mind you, I would always probably, if there's insurance, I would definitely on a high-end instrument like that, get theft insurance on it and stuff like that, because, you know, things happen. And, you know, you don't want to be on the hook for a thousands of dollars of guitar. Now, my SG3, this is possibly the best bang for the buck Gibson ever made. You know, 2006, this thing was $1,560 before tax Canadian with the case. you know what I mean? And it's a limited run guitar on top of that. I've seen these things go for about 4,000 used. It's kind of crazy. Very awesome guitar. It has 2 classic 57s and a 57 plus. So something like this, you got to kind of buy. You probably wouldn't be able to rent something like this. I call it the poor man's SG Custom, but you can't get a Gibson like this now for $1,560. Bang for the buck. That's an awesome pro level guitar and a fantastic recording guitar. It does need to be regrounded because it's starting to buzz really bad, but it's an 18-year-old guitar. But the point I'm making is that I would rather rent that Les Paul, but I'd have to be making like, you know, a lot of money to justify renting a guitar like that. I'd rather take the rental, like a you know, because I have no problem playing Les Pauls. I am an SG guy, Les Paul guy, always have been, and probably always will be. You know, some people love them, some people don't, but that's my thing, right? But the thing is that if something were to ever happen to this guitar live, I would, be unconsolable. You know what I mean? Where a rental's a different thing. So if you're going into a studio and you want better equipment, you can rent better. I've seen drummers do this lots, where they've got their home kit, but their home kit, it's like, it's kind of patched together. It's the gigging machine. They don't really care how beat up it gets, but it's not giving them the tones that they would want. So instead, they go and they rent the better drum kit. But you can do that, with amplifiers and stuff like a 4x12 Mesa Boogie. Most people can't afford to buy that, but you could rent it. And years ago when I worked in a music store, people would rent everything. We had a Les Paul. It was either a 78, 79 Les Paul custom white, or it was a 1982 or 1984 one, or 81. It was somewhere around that. I played that Les Paul in the store as many times as possible, but they would rent it out. And it was a phenomenal guitar. It really made you feel like you were Randy Rhoads. It looked exactly like what he had. But it was a true Les Paul custom with the gold tuners with the flip up winders on them and stuff like that. It was really, really, really cool. You got to wonder, when you see a lot of guys on stage with really phenomenal guitars, are they just renting them? And is that a great option for people? And again, a lot of people are not aware of that. So that's why I did the title that I did. For some people out there that might be, they might never be able to afford that, but they might be able to afford something like a couple $100 a month for maybe 1 or 2 months, rent the guitar for 1 or 2 months or something like that, and then bring it back. It's just, you got to make sure you don't damage it or whatever. Like I say, get insurance on it or whatever. So for touring bands, I'm sure they do this all the time. For recording artists that just want a little bit better, maybe you have your favorite guitar at home, but it's just, you go to the studio with it and the guy at the studio says, hey, look, that guitar is not ready to be in the studio. First off, change your damn strings. Yeah, if you can't afford to put new strings on the guitar, well, that's a different thing. But yeah, at least start there anyway. But like, for example, if I was to go to a professional recording studio, this guitar needs to be regrounded because of the buzzing, right? I just wouldn't record something with a guitar that does that. So I probably would rent something. Well, I don't need to rent anything because I've got enough guitars here, but, or take this in and have it, well, I could do it myself, but, I have rewired this thing myself, anyway. So I think it's just, it's time to, buy some new, freshen it up or whatever, but that's another story for another time. But that said, when this guitar is in peak condition, it is a great recording guitar. It just sounds phenomenal. I've tweaked it for that. And if I didn't have the money and I didn't have this is probably something like what I would rent to take to a studio, because when you're done with the end product that you're going to be living with something that is really, really good. So, renting musical equipment, it might be a great option. Now, let's say you're just starting out, okay? Maybe you don't rent the Les Paul for $170 or $300, depending on, like the Les Paul custom or whatever. Maybe you rent an Epiphone for, something like $40 a month or something like that. And you find out whether you like playing or not. And for a lot of beginners, renting is a great idea, because a lot of people give up, like you rent the guitar for 2 months and you picked it up twice. It'll save you, $500, $400 or $500 of buying an amp, buying a cheap guitar and whatever. Or, even at that, you want to learn on something that's, really fantastic. Let's say you spent, $50 or $60. You might not get this, but you might get something, that plays really, really well. And you learn on it, and then you say, okay, after about 6 months of, maybe you spent $600, or like after 3 months, you spent like $300, $120 to $300 renting guitars, and you find you're going to stick with it. Then you say, okay, well, that's it. I'll go out and buy something really good. But maybe I'll rent one more guitar, and I'll rent a really professional guitar, just so I have kind of comparison between a cheap guitar and an upper end level guitar. And to give you an idea, out of all the hundreds of guitars I've played, or maybe thousands of guitars I've played over the years, when I go into a music store, I've tried pretty much every guitar on the wall that I can get my hands on, that they'll let me put my grubby hands on. This guitar is probably the best guitar I've ever played in my life. And I know people, oh, Gibson suck. You haven't tried this thing. I've let people try this thing, and the look on their face when they play it, and it's usually guys, I don't really like SGs, I hate SGs, blah blah blah, and they play this thing and they just have like a real coming to Jesus moment on this guitar. They're just like, this thing plays like that? That's incredible. And the way I set it up, I'm very proud how I set this thing up. But that's a typical SG, like that's how they play. And it's like, oh, that's why guys love them. Yeah, exactly. So, you can get a flavor of that. So maybe you might not be able to afford it, but maybe you can afford to have one for a couple of months, as a rental, even if you're not playing live or going to the studio or whatever. It is an option for you. So it gives you a taste of it. So you'd be like, okay, well, I can rent this guitar for, say, 2 months, and you rent the guitar for 2 months and you live with it for 2 months. Maybe you come up with enough money to either buy it, or you say, well, I like it, but I just don't need that extravagant. Maybe next year I'll rent it again or rent something similar. Or for some guys, that's just like, you know what? I don't really want to buy a lot of guitars, but I want to have a Les Paul for like, say, 2 months. And then, okay, I like that Les Paul, but I want to rent the other one for 2 months and, just swap it up.